All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Those joining us online, hello to you guys. Hello. Feel free to turn on your cameras so we can, have a little bit more of a personal feel between those joining us in person and those online. So feel free to switch on those cameras. Hello. Oh, gone again. Okay, no worries, no worries. So welcome to the second forum in the Caribbean e-mobility dialogues, knowledge exchange in support of achieving nationally determined contributions, also known as NDCs in transport. So these sessions are being co-hosted by the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, also known as CCREEE, and the University of the West Indies Mona campus, with the support of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy, BMWE, via their International Climate Initiative and in cooperation with the GIZ. So our aim in this series is to advance the Caribbean's electric mobility agenda by exploring adaptation trends, validating regional positions on interoperability, and sustaining the transition through collaboration, training, and financing. So today, before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge some very special people. Dr. Mohammed Nadi, he's the Executive Director of CCREEE. He's joining us online. Dr. Nadi, if you are here, do you want to give us a hands up or a wave? Is he here? No. Okay, no problem. Mr. Peter Ainsworth, he's the Senior Project Officer at the BDO. Our presenters, Ms. Sherry-Ann Farquharson, she's the Technical Chief of Staff at CCREEE. Mr. Giovanni Boku, he's the Project Manager and Engineer at CCREEE. And Mr. Xavier Gordon, who is joining us online. Hi, Mr. Gordon from Flash Motors. He's the President. So colleagues in person, online, welcome again, and thank you guys so much for making the time to join us today. So my name is Dr. Savannah Lloyd, and I will serve as a moderator for this event today. I currently serve as lecturer, one of 2 undergraduate coordinators in the department, and I am a material science researcher. One of the things I love about this department is the many opportunities that we have for interdisciplinary collaboration. So even though I'm a material scientist by profession, I'm really looking forward to the discussions today to see how we can spark some conversations between EV technologies and materials. We all know that the better the material science processing, the better smart materials we have, the more efficient devices we can also make, and they become more cost effective, right? So really looking forward to the discussions today. So we are hosting these activities under the program supporting the implementation of NDCs in the Caribbean. This is where we talk about the transformation of transport and energy sectors towards a low carbon and climate resilient future. So the acronym for that very long title is NDC-TEC, all right? And this is also being funded by BWE and GIZ. So please, let's give a round of applause for our financiers. All right. So again, we want to thank them wholeheartedly for their contribution towards this project. Thank you, onliners. So today our forum is going to be focusing on accelerating change, innovation, and interoperability in the Caribbean e-mobility sphere. So we will be taking a closer look at the NDC-TEC pilots in Saint Lucia, Jamaica, and Grenada, which have been designed as a data-driven approach, ensuring that the decisions on vehicle types, charging locations, usage models are evidence-based and replicable. All right, so essential focus will be on the emerging interoperability of charging systems across the region, which is a key lesson from the pilots that demonstrates how common standards and coordinated infrastructure planning can unlock efficiencies, reduce costs, and accelerate wider EV adaptation across the entire Caribbean region. All right, so before we start to hear from our presenters, I'd first like us to welcome greetings, very briefly, from Mr. Peter Ainsworth. So as I mentioned before, he is the Senior Project Officer at the BDO with the primary responsibility for public-private partnerships. He was previously the project manager for the successful development of the cogen plant from 2019 to 2024, and he oversaw its operation and maintenance. I just bigging up a little bit before. I'm not done yet. There's more. So in his current role, Mr. Ainsworth leads the determination of campus utility billing rates, and he acts as the quality control officer for billing commercial entities operating on the campus. Additionally, he develops project proposals and special initiatives aimed at income generation, and he also conducts reviews of existing cash centers to identify opportunities for improved profitability and operational efficiency. Don't this sound like a very important man?
Yes.
Yes, I think so. So let's give him a welcome.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to bring greetings on behalf of the University of the West Indies Business Development Office. I want to commend the Department of Physics and our partners in organizing this timely, forward-looking dialogue on Caribbean e-mobility. These sessions are not just about technology. They are about shaping sustainable futures for our institutions and our region. At the university, we have recognized that we play a critical role as thought leaders in the Caribbean's transition towards e-mobility and wider sustainability. From our previous attempts to explore e-mobility, we have learned valuable lessons, chief among them that e-mobility adoption must be structured, deliberate, and supported by the right infrastructure and partnerships. Our current efforts are therefore more integrated and purposeful. The university has identified that a structured approach is essential to enable e-mobility adoption across our operations. With our own power generation capacity on campus, the potential benefits are significant, not only in cost savings, but also in advancing our sustainability agenda and reducing our environmental footprint. We are presently assessing our campus fleet to determine where electronic vehicles can replace internal combustion units, thereby improving overall efficiency and reducing fuel dependency. The data from these assessments will guide our transition plan and provide insights into vehicle performance, operating costs, and emission reduction. Importantly, we will ensure that the information gathered feeds back into our academic departments to support research, policy recommendation, and continuous innovation in this space. To support the broader program, we have developed a proposal that lays out a framework for the deployment of charging stations across the Mona campus. This framework considers key factors such as location, accessibility, standard design, and interoperability, ensuring that charging infrastructure can accommodate different vehicle types and adapters. We are also carefully examining charging times, energy output, and user experience to ensure that the system is practical and beneficial to all intended users. As part of this initiative, we intend to incentivize departments and faculties to transition to suitable EVs for their specific use cases. Alongside the adoption of these vehicles, maintenance systems and monitoring tools will be established to track performance from purchase to disposal. This complete lifecycle approach, supported by data and stakeholder engagement, will help build confidence in the technology and demonstrate its long-term value to the university community. Through collaboration among our administrative, academic, and business units, and with continued participation in sessions such as today's, we are aligning ourselves to take informed, confident steps towards a truly sustainable campus mobility framework. We believe that By leading with evidence and a systems-based approach, the UEMONA will not only transform its own operations, but also inspire confidence across the Caribbean in the viability and benefits of e-mobility. Thank you, and I wish everyone a productive and insightful session today.
Thank you so much again. Another reason to believe that this UEMONA campus is always at the center of innovation and forward movement. Yeah. When you're ready to talk about the recycling part, please to make sure that you engage the Department of Physics, specifically our material scientists. So we can talk about how we can use that recycling capability or opportunity to build capacity for reuse as well. All right. So thank you so much again, Mr. Ainsworth. Lovely greetings. All right. So now, guys, we're going to get into our presentation. So before we do, if I may, I'd also like to big up two of our presenters from CCREEE. All right, Mr. Giovanni Buckle and Ms. Sherry-Ann Farquharson. So Mr. Giovanni Buckle is currently a project manager and engineer at CCREEE. He has expertise in renewable energy systems, power system planning, and electric mobility, and leads multi-stakeholder projects that advance the region's transition to clean and resilient energy. Giovanni's work spans integrated source and resilience planning, also known as IRRPs, generation expansion planning, and the NDC-TEC project, where he leads e-mobility initiatives focused on introducing electric vehicles and charging infrastructure through technology pilots across the entire Caribbean. He holds a BSc in electrical power engineering from the UEMONA and is certified in project management and is certified for, he's certified in project management for development. He is passionate about innovation and strengthening climate resilience and energy security in the Caribbean. All right, couple of hands for Mr. Buckle, please. Let me also give you a brief introduction to Ms. Sherry-Ann Farquharson, also a product of the Department of Physics as well. Online, as I don't hear no whoop whoop from you guys. It's sounding quite quiet over there. Thanks, Jordan. All right, Ms. Sherry-Ann Farquharson is a technical chief of staff at the CCREEE. She is a senior manager where she leads the region's energy transition through innovation, regional collaboration, and capacity building initiatives. With expertise in knowledge management, project execution, and the promotion of renewable energy and energy efficiency, she drives projects that advance sustainable energy solutions across the Caribbean. She has contributed to the curriculum development of the renewable energy curriculum at the Heart Trust NTA and operations management at FACE Commodity Telecom Division, optimizing processes across the Caribbean, Central, and South America. Ms. Farquharson holds an MPhil in physics and a BSc in electronics and physics from the Department of Physics. I put that in there for you, from the UEMONA. She's also a certified energy manager and solar PV installer and a member of organizations like the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition and the Council on Women in Energy and Environmental Leadership. Her passion for sustainable energy, capacity building, and gender inclusivity continues to shape the Caribbean's energy future. My goodness, I'm inspired. So let's give a hand to Ms. Farquharson and Mr. Buckle. Before you start, Sherry-Ann, let me just give everybody a kind of like an overview on how this is gonna go. So Sherry-Ann is gonna give her presentation, and Mr. Buckle as well. Afterwards, we'll have a 10-minute Q&A for both. Onliners, I'll just ask you to raise your hand. If you're having issues with your mic, you can just type it in the chat. And we'll also take questions from the audience as well. So Sharon, I hope you don't mind me sharing the podium with you afterwards. So I'll just, try to flip between the two. All right, so thank you, Sharon. Go ahead, please.
All right. Thank you so much, Savannah. Really appreciate the warm welcome. It's good to be home. So, boy, it doesn't sound like it. Well, Giovanni and I know it's very good to be home. Not yet. All right, so colleagues online, gonna ask you to confirm that you're seeing the presentation in full screen. Oh, 1 minute. All right, so we're not seeing Zoom while. I may need a hand. I can't find that Zoom. Okay, all right, so I got a confirmation, yes.
You good?
Yeah, I was hoping to be able to see that, but it's fine.
I think it is going to
Okay. All right. Okay, so we can get started. And this second dialogue on the e-mobility dialogues that we're doing across the region, we wanted to actually focus today on the actual pilot projects that are happening. So there are 5 countries that are part of the NDC-TEC project, and we will be doing pilots in 3 of those countries. And as a technical organization, the approach that the CCREEE has taken, we've described it as e-mobility dynamics, and looking at the physics. I'm the physics, and Giovanni's the engineering of data-driven design and interoperability. So we'll give you an overview of the 3 flagship projects in countries, and then we'll drill down into the data-driven design, the vehicle selection, and then we'll wrap that up with the interoperability conversation. So the objective of the pilots is that within the energy and transportation nexus, we're looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Largely, transport is about 30 to 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in most of the Caribbean countries. And so it's also one of the harder to decarbonize sectors. It's very easy to switch to solar PV, wind, hydro, and decarbonize electricity. Transport has not been that much of a straight line. And so this project is looking at helping countries to be able to achieve their commitments in the transport sector. So that's the first one, lower greenhouse gas emissions. The second is to demonstrate that this is feasible to do. So not just that it's not a theory. This is something that can be done in practice. And we will always make sure that what we're doing does not leave anyone behind. So building institutional capacity is important, whether it's the work that the UE is doing, that they've been awarded for the work that they're doing in terms of building capacity under this project, but also for those who will benefit across the region, that they are strengthened in terms of being able to understand and share the knowledge. And finally, through these demonstrations, to catalyze national and regional adoption of electric vehicles. So as I said, we're working in 3 countries. In Saint Lucia, we are electrifying vehicles in the public transport sector. And that includes the ambulance service, customs and excise department, fire service and emergency response, postal, the police force, Ministry of Education, infrastructure, health, and then their water and sanitation company. That's the equivalent of National Water Commission in Jamaica. So there are varied types of vehicles. So we're not just buying cars. So there are from the 4x4 pickups for the emergency response and the police, to small duty vehicles that are moving goods. And bikes for the postal service. So it's the wide range of electric vehicles to demonstrate that it's not just for residential use and persons who may have the money to buy it, but also it is a real solution for the public sector. And this pilot in Saint Lucia is replacing older vehicles. And when we get into the data, you'll see that they really have, just like the rest of the Caribbean, some vehicles that should have been retired a long ago that are still on the road. So actually replacing those vehicles. In Grenada, and this may be the most exciting one because this is where most of the innovation is coming in, looking at electrifying marine transport. So here we're working with the Coast Guard and 3 fishing cooperatives in Carriacou, Petit Martinique, and Guave, as well as the Marine Protected Area Patrol. So we're doing a mixture here of changing out some of the diesel engines to electric motors. And we are also purchasing new vessels. And what we've recognized as we've been there is that because of the weight distribution of the batteries and everything, that we're actually taking it one step further, and we're going to be designing a boat to increase the efficiency and safety of how these will operate, and that I'll also get into. And then here in Jamaica, we're working with our tertiary institutions, national tertiary institutions, Caribbean Maritime University, UTEC Jamaica, and HART, JAGAS, to provide buses for those institutions. I know we're here at UWI. UWI is a part of the consortium implementing the project, and there are other things that UWI is getting under the project. So don't want to say why UWI not getting a bus. But UWI has really been a crucial partner, and institutional capacity in terms of being able to have facilities for teaching, training, and research will be embedded here for the longevity of the project. So we've said this several times that it is a data-driven pilot. So thanking Amar for being here, because this a bit of a nod to the small time I spent looking into transportation engineering and understanding fleets, moving persons, understanding what you need to do in terms of the road conditions, what's required to be able to manage the different terrains and all of that. So we would have collected all of that data, because we don't want an experience where we've provided these vehicles and then they don't either function optimally or where persons have to make too many changes to how they operate. It should enhance how they operate as well as be cheaper. And one of the things that we've seen where there have been persons who purchase vehicles that are not fit for their environment, and then you hear, oh, these vehicles don't work. So we want to make sure that, one, they get a good experience, but also that what is provided is actually fit for purpose for the different tasks that need to happen in the different beneficiaries. So how did we approach this? We started out by looking at what they already have. So most are using diesel or petrol vehicles. We also looked at the procurement plans and recognized that without the intervention of a project like this, because procurement is primarily price-based, then, and when I say price-based, the purchase cost, then most persons are going to purchase a regular internal combustion engine or ICE vehicle. And you would appreciate those who have been in the space for some time with electric mobility, that while there's a higher purchase cost over the lifetime of the vehicle, it's cheaper to refuel from electricity, even if you're refueling from the grid. It's cheaper than buying gas. And the operation and maintenance is significantly less because you have about 10% in terms of the moving parts. So there's much less to service, much less to break. So, but because of how procurement rules are, you're going to purchase the ICE vehicle. And also, we see in Saint Lucia, for instance, where they have a procurement policy that vehicles should be replaced after 7 years, but there was one vehicle that was on the road after 18 years and still being used. So you recognize that the procurement plans don't necessarily align with what's happening in practice. And then ensuring that because it's a climate project, that we are looking at charging from renewables. And so we assess the charging readiness of the different institutions. So there is quite a lot of planned and existing charging. Actually, one of the institutions here in Jamaica, their plans for solar is going to be beyond what they need for the campus. So giving them the EVs where that will just help them to use that demand rather than having to curtail their production was a very easy opportunity there. And then the training capacity needs, because again, the longevity of the project beyond the pilot is important. So having those opportunities for training is very crucial. And then we recognize a lot of persons, there's a high reliance on public transport, particularly in Jamaica. And so being able to provide safer options for students was another key thing that we noticed when we did the baseline. So next, we started to look at, all right, let's categorize it now. So we're getting into a little bit more of the data analysis. So we broke all of that down. So there are 4 broad categories that we assessed for suitable vehicles to be included in the pilot. And this is across the 3 pilots. So they had to be vehicles that were used, highly used. So we don't want something that you're going to use once a week, once a month. No, we want to make sure that the taxi man will know that it can work for him, that if you're on the road all the time, this is a good solution. So we looked at the mileage, type of fuel, what is your downtime, where you're fueling, how often you have to refuel. And then we also looked at vehicles that were due for replacement, because if you just bought a vehicle last year, as much as I want you to make a cleaner option, it don't make sense to actually get another one this year. So vehicles that were due for replacement. Though in some instances we found, like with the police service in Saint Lucia, they were short on vehicles. That sounds very familiar, right? So we're not doing replacements there. We're adding to the fleet. And the same thing with the tertiary institutions here that we're supporting. They're all have less than they need. High visibility, because we are sharing the lessons. So people need to be able to see the vehicles on the road. And then finally, that we can find suitable replacement options for those vehicles. So with all of that, we went into the scoring of the data. So this is really a snapshot. So using the colors to determine, we use a stoplight system to sort the data. So it doesn't have the numbers here, just I'm sure you would want to see this Excel sheet full of numbers. So just the colors once you would have done the scoring. So we would have looked at the high utilization. So that would have been the first set of scores that we would have done. So those that have the high fueling costs, the high maintenance costs, those that are on the road all the time. So we took those out first, highlighted those vehicles. Then we looked at the vehicles that were due for replacement. So this is pretty much a sort by age. Actually, the age and the maintenance costs were a part of whether or not this is time for you to replace this vehicle. And then we looked at the visibility. So what routes are the vehicles traveling? Are they within the town centers? Are they primarily rural? We had a pretty decent distribution of that. And then finally, the relevance, which is whether or not we can actually find a suitable replacement option, as well as, is this a vehicle that's used on the road? Because again, we are demonstrating to persons that this is a viable option. So we ended up with from Saint Lucia, which is the pilot that's furthest advanced, because they've actually ordered the vehicles and they are being manufactured to be delivered in Saint Lucia as we speak. We started out with a top 20. So there was one vehicle from the fire service that was high in all 4 categories. It was old, it was using a lot of gas, very well used and all of that. And then we had those that were high in like 3 categories from the police and the postal service, which you can imagine these vehicles are out on the road every day and across the country. And then we had those that were high in kind of like 2 categories. So we narrowed it down to 20. The intention was to purchase the top 15. So that would have gone down to number 15, which would have been one for the ambulance service. And then with all of that, we now go to the vehicle selection. And this is where it gets interesting. So this now becomes a little less science and a little more finessing, because we have three approaches that we could take. We could look at just swapping out like for like, which I think would have been the most inefficient version, because you recognize there are some cases where they're using an SUV where they actually need a car. Or there are instances where a person's procured a 4x4 because that's what they like to drive, but they really could use a bike. So that would have been the like for like. So we decided that not the ideal option. Option 2 would have been fit for purpose, where we looked at just what they need to do, whether you're moving people, delivering goods, you're going out into the country to test water quality. So look at providing something that would have been fit for purpose. And then option 3 is fit for pilot. And this is kind of the sweet spot where we wanted to be sure that we got a spread of vehicles to be included in the pilot. But of course, at the end of the day, it does come down to fit for procurement, because while we wanted a spread, when we surveyed the market, then we'd have to see what exactly is available to be delivered in the Caribbean. Jamaica, I think, may have a few more options available. Not everybody's delivering to the Eastern Caribbean as yet, but we were able to actually narrow that down and get a good mix of vehicles. And when we did the first round of procurement, for the 15 that we intended, we had some money left. And so they're actually purchasing 22 vehicles instead of the 15 for Saint Lucia. And a similar approach will be taken for Jamaica while we are focusing on buses, we are going to be looking at different size buses, different use cases to demonstrate that other schools, other companies, that this is something that is going to be viable for you as well. We know the JUTC has 6 buses that are on the road. Those are primarily around Kingston, but we want to look at buses that are actually going to travel across the island to get that maximum visibility and testing to be sure that, particularly the toll road, I think that may be one of the steeper hills that vehicles travel regularly, or maybe even spur tree, I don't know. We want to make sure that they can actually handle those roads. They have the power to go up. So that is the approach. So we would have just concluded the data collection for Jamaica. And so we'll now go through that same selection process to narrow down what would be the ideal options to be included there. In Grenada, as I mentioned, we're looking at marine vessels. This is not, you don't have as many options for vessels as you have for cars and buses on the road. So we started out looking at options that would have been suitable for the pilot. So we're working with the 3 fishing communities. So these are some of the typical vessels that they are actually using. Some of them go far out and for more than a week. And you can imagine if you are to carry a battery out for that long, it will make things interesting. Persons have asked about whether they could have solar. So like if for this one over here, if they could have solar on top, that's something. So there are solutions that could be lightweight. They're not as efficient. So that is something that, could be considered in the mix to give you a little bit of extra range if you're going away from shore for that long. But we think for the pilots, the ideal ones would be those that are doing the day trips. So they go out in the very early morning and then they come back by midday and they're able to charge on the shore. We will have an early pilot opportunity. The Marine Protected Area Patrol, they actually have 2 boats that have been recently retrofitted that do not yet have a motor. So we're like, well, perfect. We will just give you an electric motor and batteries. So that's going to be the first one. And that we'll be able to use to show the fisher folk what exactly can happen. And they're very excited. As the fishing community in Grenada, they're very innovative. They're always trying things. So they're already to actually try these, and some of them are even ready to invest themselves beyond what the pilot will be donating. And then as we were looking at the design of the vessels they usually use, we recognize that we're gonna have to do a little bit of naval architecture to ensure that when we put the batteries in the hull, that we maintain that weight distribution that will allow them to get the efficiency that's required, because we're not increasing their costs when we electrify. That is one of the opportunities that we need to ensure. And so this, for me, is going to be one of the most interesting ones. And I could spend days talking about Grenada, because it is quite eye-opening to see how they approach fishing there. And then the final step that we take with this, after we've done all of the engineering and the assessing and the moving around of numbers, is so we wrap this up with a validation workshop with the beneficiaries, making the recommendations based on our assessments, making sure that what we've interpreted from the data is accurate, and that the solutions that we're proposing will actually work for them. And so that would be the final step in the process for the design and implementation of the pilot. And so you can look out for it in terms of the timelines for those who are in Grenada. Let me not start with Grenada. That's a little earlier. In Saint Lucia, those vehicles are intended to be on the ground before the end of this year. In Jamaica, we intend to go to procurement by January next year. We'll see how long it takes. The EV Association says the buses can be here in 6 to 8 months. I feel like it may be a little bit closer to 9, but we'll see what happens once we get to procurement. But definitely towards the end of 2026, going into 2027, we intend to have those buses, and then collecting the data. So we'll be including telematics on the boats, the buses, the cars, so we understand how they're performing as we go. And then we'll share all that data with you. So if there's research questions you have, that data will be made publicly available so that we can do that assessment and learn and continue to share the lessons like we're doing here, but also in other form of infographics to a wider community, because the final aim really is to see this transition happen. So now I'm going to hand over to Giovanni, because as we've been doing this, we've recognized another interesting question, opportunity, challenge that we need to address, and that is interoperability.
Thank you very, very much, Sherian. Very good explanation of essentially the approach, the methodology that we're doing to ensure that as we are designing these systems, as we are testing the technology in the transportation sector, that it's robust and it's fit for purpose. So what I want to speak about today is interoperability. It's a new concept to most. I did touch on it in the last presentation, but it is essentially looking at the ability of different electric vehicles, the charging infrastructure, the software systems, the data networks, and so on, from different and varying manufacturers, and for them to work seamlessly with each other. To kind of drive home the point, I kind of want to touch on interoperability in other industries. So looking in the technical or the technology industry, where we're looking at USB-C, for example. As we know, there's several different types of connectors, types of standards. So you're looking at USB, micro USB, USB-C, lightning cable, and so on. What you're seeing now is that the market is trending towards one standard, which is a USB-C, and you're using it to charge your laptop, your phone, your camera, all these different types of devices. This is a whole goal of interoperability, and I'm sure you can appreciate it's a little bit frustrating if, for example, I need to charge my phone, and I have an iPhone charger that uses lightning cable, and I cannot charge it because my friend has a Samsung charger. So essentially, the whole goal of interoperability is to ensure that things, devices from different manufacturers work seamlessly together. As it relates to interoperability in the transport sector, it already exists, especially for ICE engines, so which is your traditional gas, diesel engines. There's interoperability that currently exists, and it's set up such that
you aren't even aware. You don't care when you go to a gas station. You know, for example, that the pump nozzle will fit inside your car. You're not checking to see, does this gas station work, or does this gas station have the connector for me to actually put gas inside my car? Same thing for fuel standard types. So you're looking at 87, 90 diesel. These are set standards for the cars. You're not having to worry about this as you're using your gas vehicles. As it relates to fuel pricing, this is also something that is standardized. In Jamaica, it's different because you have each gas station has their own different prices, but you're seeing other countries within the Caribbean, there's one set price. It doesn't matter which gas station you go to, uptown, downtown, or roundabout, it doesn't really matter. You will have the same set prices. This is looking at setting standards. All right, the next thing is looking at payment methods. You know that you can use your credit card, your debit card, cash, and so on. These are different types of payments that all work. And I'll speak a little bit on it as it relates to electric vehicles because there's more margin for differences. As I had mentioned in the last presentation, I would have spoken about different challenges, different barriers to EV adoption, not only in the Caribbean, but across the world. I've just pinpointed specific ones because they're related to interoperability. So we're looking at the limited charging infrastructure, looking at range anxiety, as well as low public awareness and how it fits into interoperability. Right? So as it relates to what we need to consider, because it is new emerging technology and there are many different standards that currently exist, if we're looking, for example, at the charging infrastructure, there's several different types of connectors based off of the type of power or the manufacturer in terms of where it's coming from. So there's different standards if it's in USA, in Europe, in China, in Japan, and there's difference if it's AC power or DC power. And as you can imagine, it will be quite frustrating if every station that's close by you has no connectors that fits your car, right? As it relates to the payment systems, interoperability is very important because there are different ways utilities or the people who are installing the charging infrastructure themselves will do their payment schemes. Am I paying for how long I'm connected? Am I paying based off of the peak power demand that's coming from my vehicle itself, or overall the energy, right? So in terms of looking at setting standards, interoperability into these type of systems is going to be extremely important because it reduces the confusion. And as you can appreciate, there's not a lot of knowledge as it relates to electric vehicles, that's widely known. So having these things and reducing the need to worry, to stress about these things, reduces that anxiety that you're seeing currently speaking. As it relates to data and communication standards, a similar approach in terms of the thought process behind charging. It's with respect to that. And then lastly is the regulatory frameworks. Typically speaking, the policymakers, the people who are putting these regulations in place are the ones that have some form of control. I'll speak a little bit more on what that would look like going forward. But in terms of signaling to the market what the standard is, what each charging station should have, is something that's going to be extremely important in terms of interoperability. Right now, because there's not a lot of electric vehicles on the market, it's not a massive challenge. But if you imagine going forward, if everybody's just buying different electric vehicles, different standards from all over the place, it will get quite frustrating when you have a wide outroll of electric vehicles. Right? There's pros and cons, contextualized for the region. We are across the region, you're finding that most utilities are state-owned, which is very good because as you're seeing, for example, with JPS, they would have now started the outroll of their EV charging infrastructure. And it's a little easier if it's state-owned for the utilities to signal that standard for what all connectors are. And as you could be able to appreciate, if the utility is the one that's driving the charging infrastructure and putting this onto the market, it would signal and the market would follow what standard is being put in place. Because if everything, for example, is the EU standard, it would just make sense for me to get a vehicle that has that type of compatibility. What's good is that generally speaking, or on a global scale, we're relatively small. And because of that, it means that we need less extensive public infrastructure as it relates to charging. For example, in Barbados, who is leading the region as it relates to e-mobility and charging infrastructure, they have over 100 charging stations. which is massive. That is leading the region. But if you now compare that to what the United States would have had to do in terms of installing the charging infrastructure to build that confidence with the consumers, they would have installed more than 81,000 charging stations, with Tesla leading that. So as you can appreciate, it's slightly easier within the region if we are to do so in terms of the outroll of charging infrastructure, especially because the utilities are owned by the state, making this transition a little bit easier. There are some cons in the sense that because we are small by ourselves, it's a little harder for us to enforce that standard into the private sector, noting that it's a little bit more difficult for us to signal to the EU, signal to China, and so on, that this is a standard that we're doing. You have to make your cars in this way. Similar, and you can appreciate versus left-hand drive versus right-hand drive. It's a little bit more challenging for us to say, this is exactly what we're going to be doing. Last thing is a concept that I had spoken about from before, which is looking at an open economy. People are importing whatever vehicles that they want to. It's very difficult to regulate and just capture the data. And this is the data systems that exist within at the wharf when you're importing a car. It's a little challenging because, as you would be able to appreciate, if this is the first time that a country is seeing this type of vehicle, this type of engine, this type of connector, it's a little bit difficult to quantify going forward. But these are things that can be not necessarily controlled, but you're signaling to the market, signaling to the community that this is what we're going to do going forward, and using that type of interoperability approach to kind of, so even though it's a con, there's a way to get around it. That being said, what does it look like in terms of implementation of interoperability? It's signaling a preference. You're not banning. We are not allowed to ban the importation, for example, of Chinese vehicles or EU vehicles, but more so signaling that this is our preference. And if we're signaling that this is our preference as a region, then we have much more bargaining power to go out and say, okay, China or EU or so on, this is what we are doing going forward. Adjust your manufacturing and so on to fit this type of standard. This is looking at even, for example, the batteries and being able to withstand the heat within the region because they're not catering for that, because their market is in these colder colder countries, then they're not catering towards us. So it's a way to build in strength in unity, and that is done through signaling, through regulations being put in place, to the utilities themselves supporting. And what that would look like is when a regulation is put in place, for example, for the charging infrastructure, you can have it such that you have to have at least one connector, and this is a standard. It's not stopping them from putting additional connectors, additional adapters, but it is signaling that this is a preference and this is a standard that must be followed. Similar to, and it's kind of tying together in terms of, for example, the utility, if they're the ones that are doing this, this is a standard that they're following. If they want to build on that, then that's no problem at all. In terms of the implementation, as I was just mentioning, it's significantly easier if the utilities themselves, so your JPS in different countries are leading this transition, which is what we're seeing within the Caribbean. It's important to note, or I want to give an example of what this has looked like going forward. For example, in Chile, where they would have signaled to the industry that the standard that they're going to use is the EU standard. When they would have done that, they've now found that 95% of the market uses this standard, even though there are no restrictions in terms of importation for the Chinese standards, for the American standards, for the Japanese. So it has, if the regulations are put in place, the right regulations, and it's supporting and signaling this type of preference, you'll find that the market generally follows that transition. That's essentially a broad overview. What's important to note that the CCREEE underneath the NDC-TEC project is we will procure a consultant who's going to be doing an interoperability report for the Caribbean, looking at what standard is best suited and then signaling this or recommending this to CARICOM for them to do the signaling from the regional perspective. This is an output, a concrete output of this project. And we're hoping that going forward, we have a seamless transition into renewably driven electric vehicles inside the region. Thank you.
right, thank you so much. All right, we'll have a little change in how we're gonna be doing the question and answer section. Mr. Xavier Gordon is kind of on a tight time limit. So we're gonna have him present first, and then we're gonna take all questions after. So I'm gonna beg onliners and persons joining us in person, just write down your questions so you don't forget it. And then we'll post the Q&A for all the presenters after, all right? So, Mr. Xavier Gordon, just allow me to briefly introduce you before you'll get your opportunity to present. So, Mr. Xavier Gordon is the president of Flash Motors, Jamaica's and the Caribbean's leading electric mobility solutions company. Under his leadership, Flash offers a full spectrum of EV-related services, from electric vehicles and charging infrastructure to fleet electrification, consulting, and financing. Before founding Flash, Mr. Gordon built his career in engineering and the clean energy sector. Early on, he worked at the General Electric in roles focused on large AC/DC motors and wind turbines, honing both his technical and project management skills. Later, he founded Exergy. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Mr. Gordon, please forgive me. Exergy Energy in Ontario, Canada, where he led solar PV installations and utility partnerships, including the development of public and private EV charging networks. Driven by his passion for sustainable transport, Mr. Gordon founded Flash Motors to accelerate EV adaptation in the Caribbean. He and his team have since engaged governments, utilities, and private fleets across the region to design, deploy, and scale electric mobility infrastructure. In addition to his role at Flash, Xavier has served in leadership positions in the clean energy sector and remains active in industry associations. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Xavier Gordon. So I think you should have permission to share your screen. You're still on mute though.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you now. Perfect. All right, so go ahead.
Right.
Hang on.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the time. I just want to make a quick connection. While I did not go to UWI, I did grow up on the UWI Mona campus. Both my parents completed their degrees there as well. So not a Pelican, but honorary at the very least. I spent a lot of my youth on Mona campus. So there's a little connection there as well. Let me dive right into it. So who are we? Flash, we're e-mobility solutions provider. So I say that because, within the context of e-mobility, there are a lot of things that are sort of needed to make the ecosystem succeed. And that's where we sit. We sit at a big picture point of view, looking at all the different elements. So, we supply retail and commercial battery electric vehicles, AC and DC charging infrastructure. We have our own network called Flash Charge, which is a OCPP network that both the AC and DC charging infrastructure can work on. We developed that with our charging partner ABB, which is the world's largest supplier of charging stations, I believe 10 years in a row. So we've done quite a bit of work with ABB in electrifying the region. And we also have developed our own customized fleet integration tools to help our customers figure out how to best integrate, a large number of EVs into their businesses. And I'll get into that a little bit later on. In the region, we've been here before, myself and my team have been here before Flash was even existing as a company. In a lot of the early days, helping fleet electrification plans. So Jamaica Public Service Company was, really our first foray into the Caribbean when it came to taking a look at their fleet and helping them develop a plan for electrification. We did that back in 2017. We actually worked on the government of Saint Lucia fleet that has been the foundation for some of the work that's happening right now. We did that in 2018 with the RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute. So we were on the ground looking at 500 vehicles that were sitting in the St. Lucia government fleet back in 2018 and helping them look at a plan or where the opportunities were. So here in Cheyenne, go over a lot of the procurement process and roles, took me back and actually reminded me of some of the work that we did way back in the day before. I think, the region has now moved into an execution phase. We also did work in Bermuda and Barbados under electric bus program back in 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic times, essentially, where now we see both of those countries leading in electric bus deployment as well, too. So we've been involved in the region at a very early stage, before electric vehicles were cool, I would say. We've also been part of the scaling up process. Both the charging networks in Jamaica, Belize, Guyana, we participated in those designs, whether directly, as we did here in Jamaica with JPS, or indirectly as we did in Belize and Guyana, through the GIZ, where we worked on network designs and fundamentals based on the work that we did in Jamaica. And we've also done quite a bit of, fleet electrification when it comes to infrastructure, both for the private sector and for the governments, in Jamaica. Currently, right now, we're, operating two national networks. The one put up by Lucelec in Saint Lucia, that's running on flash supplied ABB hardware and a flash charge software. And the same thing with Guyana, a network of DC charging stations put up by the GEA, running on Flash's ABB hardware and our flash charge software. And we're currently supplying private and government fleets with EVs, as well as operating our own retail EV sales car dealership in Jamaica. So quite a bit of work, and that's why I say we're an e-mobility expert, not necessarily just selling EVs. We sort of look at the whole thing from network designing, infrastructure planning, all the way to fleet electrification planning, as well as actually supplying, servicing the EVs. I did see Brian Constantine here in the guest list. So Brian, I quickly threw up a picture of you there on the right side. Brian has been very active in the renewable and EV space in Guyana. So if you look to the right, that's actually the first DC charging session that ever happened in Guyana, for one of the charging stations we put up there at the airport. So we were doing a test charge there. The other two pictures on the right are for the public charging network in Saint Lucia. We see one of the AC charging stations to the far left, and in the middle, this was us configuring, I believe last year, 2024, the DC charging station that's near the airport, there in Saint Lucia as well too. So we've been doing a lot of work around the region for quite a bit of time, and now we're starting to see the scaling up happening in the region, both from the private sector and from the fleets. And why does this experience matter? Because it's not just about being able to provide product, which is really where Flash kind of came into being and operating, but it's a lot to do with the planning, the deployment, and the operations and maintenance. So anything and everything that we're supplying into the marketplace, it's not just giving products, but it's also keeping those products up and running, because we really do believe that a lot of these projects and products that we're supplying into the market are serving as really good examples for electrification, and we got to make sure that it has the best impression possible as well. So, the pilot project that CCREEE and GIZ are putting on right now are going to continue to expand on that. And I'm really happy to see, very technically minded people operating this, because, the data and, the control measures are going to be extremely important in providing the general market, whether it's the government fleets or the private fleets or the general consumer, with all the information they need to make an informed decision. So, we're gung-ho about that and about the project as it continues to expand across the region. What I'm going to focus in on right now is just talking about our experiences with fleets and what the fleet managers really look like. So I'm going to give you guys just a typical setup of how customers have sort of went about it and how we've started to optimize that. Usually we'll get a fleet manager or a company owner or a CEO who personally will believe in electric mobility, and they're going to want to look to deploy EVs on a company level. They may have owned a personal EV and see the benefit for themselves, and they typically start with a grand vision, 15, 16, 20 vehicles that they want to procure, with the goal of operating, lowering their operating costs, signaling that they're taking a corporate leadership or a government leadership and trying to build momentum. But what we've realized is how this transition is done is going to make all the difference. Typically, what people do is what we call plug and pray. They'll order some EVs from a car dealer without looking at the infrastructure. They'll basically buy one AC charger per vehicle. They don't really have much of a conversation with the utility. They don't really do much in terms of fleet analysis. It's just really a gut feel. Cherian would have sort of put up their methodology in terms of how they're doing, the fit of the vehicles into it and looking at different scenarios and cases. That hasn't been the case in a lot of customers that we've interacted. It's just a gut feel. And then, of course, there's no back-end software when they're sort of looking at it, and no understanding of exact impact when it comes to the fleet. And so, typically what'll happen is they'll have a power constraint issue. The most common thing that we'll get a call for is a breaker tripping, because again, they'll put one charger per vehicle. They don't have any smart scheduling. So if they're in a jurisdiction like Jamaica, where they may be facing things like time of use, their electricity costs really go up. And I'll talk a little bit more about, demand charges later on. They don't get a lot of data. So, when they take their projects back to their CFO, they really don't have enough information to be able to justify a future investment. People just see new cars, they see the need to make some operational changes, and it just doesn't become quite as compelling as it used to be. We talked a little bit about interoperability. We've seen fleets, procure different vehicles with different plug standards, which they didn't understand, or sometimes the vehicles may not necessarily have three-phase charging or single-phase charging. And so they can't even scale what they get beyond that initial site. And then, the biggest thing obviously is not communicating with the utility company, because EVs do represent an increase in your electricity demand. It may eliminate your fossil fuel demand, but it does represent an increase in your electricity demand. And not having that conversation does cause delays, or can increase the cost of a project that it doesn't necessarily have to. And so just based off of that, it extends the time frame. They end up having to do retrofits. You end up having to go out and, change your electrical infrastructure, which of course costs more. Doing power upgrades and charger replacements can be very time consuming. Nowhere in the Caribbean do we make charging stations. And so inventory is always, at a premium. And so if you have to order a new charger or replace some charger, sometimes that takes time. And then, of course, management loses confidence. We've seen that in Jamaica. We've done a project with a leading company in Jamaica. We didn't get the project done in the manner that we thought it should have been done. And, they lost a lot of momentum. And I think they've actually gone back away from EVs and are looking at plug-in hybrids or mild hybrids, which obviously is a big loss for them. So, the good intentions alone don't electrify fleets. Planning does. And that's the main takeaway. So what's the best way, and the best way to do it, and what we have been doing with our customers, is what we call electrification roadmap. And it's, really in 5 stages. You're going to do a baseline fleet assessment, analyze all the different vehicles, the duty cycles, what the range needs to be, the different parking locations, what times they're going to be charging, and then selecting the right mix of vehicles and chargers that do that. And that can include both AC or DC, depending on the type. The simple solution of having one AC charger per vehicle, it could be the right way of doing it, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. And we now have customers that are actually doing that. They're doing a mix of AC and DC chargers. Site load and planning and energy planning is going to be key. So talking early and often with the utility company for a load assessment and a load study, doing some future proofing. If you do find the project to be successful, what does the second and third stage look like? One of the things we're going back to our customers now and saying is that, especially if we're going to be putting up DC chargers, maybe it's best for us to put it up on a separate meter, so that you can isolate that impact and, isolate the rest of your operations from it and be able to properly track what your energy usage is. And then doing a charging strategy, right? Smart chargers are always recommended, not always needed, but at least with a smart charger, you're able to collect the data on a vehicle by vehicle or charger by charger basis, so you can have the information. And we also recommend mixing the use of both depot charging, so at your company facility or your central facility, and using the opportunity to use public charging should your country have it. Jamaica's a great case. Barbados is another good case. Saint Lucia is growing their case. Guyana is growing their case. Belize is growing their case, where you don't necessarily need to plan that the only place that you can charge is back at your company depot. You can also take a look at some of the other places and look at public charging as mixing in, reducing your investment cost. Software integration. understanding what your load management looks like, logging the data, being capable for expansion is going to be, increasingly important. And then, the biggest thing we always recommend with businesses, as much as I'd love to sell a business 30 electric vehicles off the front and, a bunch of charging stations, it's always best to start with a pilot, right? That pilot gives you the ability to understand the impact, get feedback from your operators, from your fleet managers, justify where the economic impact can be so that you can have a compelling case to go back to the board or the CFO to justify a better expansion. And there will be lessons learned. Every fleet operates differently. There is no, one size fits all approach to it. So we do actually, encourage pilots. And again, we're really encouraged by the work that we're seeing going on in Saint Lucia with this project, because it is taking a small amount of vehicles and putting them in a variety of use cases as a pilot, which will then help to justify the larger rollout. We didn't, the project didn't say, hey, we're going to dump 50 electric vehicles and, hope for the best. Start with the pilot, get it right, fine tune it, and then build a justification for going more. And we think that that is the best way of going forward. The outcomes, obviously, with a fleet assessment, it makes sure you get the right vehicle for the job. Early utility engagement means there's no surprises at the very least. You can plan for the CapEx that will take place. Smart charging can allow you to lower those energy bills and have better uptime. That's especially important in markets like Jamaica where you have demand charges. Other markets don't necessarily have demand charges, so your need to manage isn't quite as complicated. But at the very least, it allows you to collect that data, which I think is going to be extremely important, both from the vehicle and the charger. And then, of course, try to scale, start small, make sure you have a good, clear understanding of how EVs fit into your particular business or fleet, and then sort of scale up from there without having to reinvent the wheel. And then the impact we've seen so far is, 30 to 40% faster deployment time, and usually a lower life cycle cost as well, too. So really and truly, prove the concept, which will allow you to be able to grow it. That's what we've seen work very well for a lot of our clients in the region. Let me talk a little bit about demand charges. So in a market like Jamaica, when you hit 25 kVA or more, you're introduced to a demand charge. I'm going to assume that most people in the audience understand what a demand charge is, but in case you don't, basically the utility has to plan for the largest amount of power you're going to be pulling from it at any given time. So think about a hose, a really small hose and a really large, big hose, right? The utility has to plan for the worst case scenario, and the time where you're going to be drawing the most power through that hose at any given time. And once it goes past a certain place, it requires them to do a lot of planning and a lot of provisioning in order to be able to meet that demand that you may have. And so that's what a demand charge does essentially. It's a secondary charge that's going to appear on your utility bill to basically say, because we know that at any given time you're going to be drawing a huge amount of energy, we have to basically, levy this charge onto you so that we can be able to recover our costs. That's a very simplified way of talking about it. When you start to get into charging stations, a lot of charging stations and DC charging stations, in a place like Jamaica especially, those demand charges can basically double your electricity bill. Through a lot of the work that we've done over the last 8 years, running an EV in Jamaica reduces your energy costs by about 50%. And so if you are basically doubling your energy costs, you're eliminating any benefit for switching to electric vehicles if you're not managing that demand cost. So having the software, integrating battery storage, time of use optimization, and again, doing a smart mix of AC and DC chargers, whether they're going to be on a single meter or separate meters, is the strategy to make sure that you're not hitting those demand charges and introducing yourself to basically eliminating all your cost benefit that you have to do. There are other markets that don't have demand charges, and so they don't necessarily need to worry about it quite as much. But in a place like Jamaica, where there's a big manufacturing base and big hotels that are drawing a lot of power, they have to have a demand charge so that they can keep up with the investments necessary to provide that power. And having that strategy in place is important. And we've started to actually roll out different strategies and different charger mixes to some of our fleet clients in order to avoid what those demand charges look like. So that's a big thing that a lot of companies do need to consider, and having that in your planning process is going to basically make or break the case for electric mobility. We talked a little bit quickly about it. We do believe that a lot of fleets have been pivoting away or planning to not use public charging at all whatsoever. But we think that's an error. I'll take the case of Jamaica, for instance. Pretty much every parish now, I believe, has a public DC charger. Some of the parishes have several, like obviously Kingston, St. Andrew, Montego Bay, St. Anne. They have several public chargers several parishes that have more than one DC charger. But the network is growing from the two networks, JPS Charge and Go and Evergo. And so we believe that, fleets should rely on some of those, at least in the 10% case. 90% of your charging probably will be done at your depots or at your locations, but there really isn't a need to invest in so much infrastructure that you're ignoring the use of public charging. So we've started to recommend a lot of that to our clients to start to scale back their DC charging or their need for charging, and say, rely on using some of the public charging where possible. Giovanni, I need to take you out for a drink because interoperability is one of the biggest things that I've been harping on probably for the past 8 years. Really and truly, we do need to integrate one plug standard for the region. And there are a couple of reasons why. One, for safety. Adapters are inherently dangerous, especially given the fact that we have no import control when it comes to adapters. We have no idea what quality of adapters are being used when people are using public charging stations or even private charging stations. And, they do represent a risk. There's a lot of power going through those things. And if they don't meet the right technical qualifications and safety standards for manufacturing, they could pose a safety risk both to the vehicle and the charging infrastructure. So I think that's one thing. The most obvious reason is ease of use. We're seeing it right now in Jamaica where it is a complete mess. There are people bringing in their own left-hand drive cars from China, which are in GBT. Some of the European manufacturers are supplying right-hand drive cars with the American standard. The American standard has now disappeared in favor of the Tesla standard. The only standard that's been stable and is known worldwide, especially in right-hand drive markets, is the European standard, the CCS2 Type 2 one. And that's the one that Flash has been recommended, not only just for Jamaica, but for the vehicles that we supply into the marketplace, as well as for all the infrastructure that we're putting up across the region. All of it, is really geared towards the CCS2 Type 2 charger. And that is really the de facto standard in every right-hand drive country in the world. So for right-hand drive countries, that's the one that we recommend. Left-hand drive, I think, the Tesla standard probably is the best one. It's not quite ubiquitous just as yet. When it comes to the supply chain, the Chinese typically only make the European standard or the GBT Chinese standard. And so if China is going to continue to be a big supplier of EVs into the Caribbean, then the best bet really does come down to CCS2 Type 2 European. And then as an infrastructure, supplier, what happens is that, instead of if you have a certain set of money to invest in a certain number of charging stations, your best ROI is going to be having all of those charging stations be on the same standard. When you have to start diversifying standards and supplying 3 or 4 plugs, what ends up happening is, one, your customers now have to spend extra money to buy plugs and adapters. 2, there's always going to be a confusion because the person will bring the wrong adapter, or they don't have the adapter for this plug. And then 3, your plugs will end up being worn out at different use rates. So your CCS2 adapter may end up being used the most, or plug may end up being used the most, while your chatable plug doesn't get used at all. And so now you have this imbalance in the wear and tear of your charging stations when you could have had 2 CCS2 and balance that out a lot. So, as a developer and being a supplier into the market, it's much easier to supply a lot of one thing than to supply a little of everything. And so interoperability is a big thing that I'm passionate about. We've been fighting tooth and nail in Jamaica to bring some sort of standardization around that for quite some time. Not really working, but I'm glad to see that it's happening at the very least in the other markets. Barbados, being the older, more mature market, they've consolidated to CCS2 a long time ago, and it's so easy to get around Barbados and do it. Guyana is moving towards that. Saint Lucia has already done that in their rollout. So I think we're making progress. There's still some work to be done. And, for the people who are doing their self-import, I think they're always going to be outside of that. But at the very least, when these cars are being supplied by, suppliers in the markets, I think it's easy for us to put ourselves on one standard. So that is my that's my, they say, Roman Empire. That's the thing that I think about and talk about all the time. So with that, I am done. Open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Xavier. Really appreciate your presentation. Very informative. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we're moving into the Q&A part of today's session. We're running a little bit over time, so I'll just try to flip between taking questions from the audience and from online as well. In-person people, I'll just ask, if you're coming to ask a question, just come close to the podium because the microphone is here. Onliners, just simply raise your hand, and I will allow you to unmute your mic and you can ask your questions. All right, so floor is open. Come to the front, sir. And then onliners, I'll just ask you to raise your hand by reaction, and then you guys can answer. All right, so pose your question, and then you can go ahead. Oh, you can just pop right here. Take photo.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to pose a question.
Hold on 1 second. Onliners, are you able to hear clearly? You may have to talk to the floor. Okay, here you go. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'd like to pose a question. A lot of people in Jamaica are still more comfortable with diesel vehicles and may be unsure about the new EVs. Does the TEC project plan to help educate the public on how EVs work, how to maintain them, and why they're a better choice than diesel, and how so?
Yeah, for sure. As we mentioned from before, EVs is an emerging technology, and there's not a lot of data as widely accessible, and that leads to that anxiety around electric vehicles. One thing that the CCREEE is responsible for underneath the NDC-TEC project is sharing that knowledge across. And we actually had started this a 20 episode series, short episodes, 1 minute. It's a series looking at debunking the myths around EVs, because a lot of the uncertainty and the unease from the public perspective is myths. You say, for example, EVs are so much more expensive, but if you're looking at the long-term benefits, it's significantly cheaper. Charging, even if you're connected directly to the grid, it's still cheaper than purchasing gas, even if it's not offset by renewable energy. So it's something that is definitely a part of the project. We've started advertising and sharing a lot of this information, as I said, that EV series, but also on the CCREEE, that is it's a website, it's a CARICOM Energy Knowledge Hub. It's a website that is free hosts, that it has a wide knowledge base of information as it relates to electric vehicles. And it's free, if you're from the Caribbean. CEKH dot. Right. I just put it in the chat. And essentially it has a wide knowledge base on that website, but also on our LinkedIn. Look on the CCREEE's LinkedIn. We have that EV series. Yeah, I see there's a question. Somebody's raising their hand.
So does that answer the question? All right, wonderful, thank you. Howard Kolash, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. You can go ahead and unmute your mic. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon, guys. This is a good event. My question is in relation to the pilot projects. Has there been any consideration given to using both solar and battery energy storage system in an off-grid manner to collect data that way as well?
Into collecting data. So I might not be interpreting your question correctly, but no problem. Right, but essentially what we are doing is it's a climate change project. So we're looking at definitely offsetting the demand that's coming from the different batteries for electric vehicles, buses, and boats using solar power. As it relates to using battery energy storage system to support that, it's something that we are assessing. However, it's a finite budget that we're working with. So, and from our perspective, the priority will always be to put more rolling stock, the buses and the cars onto the roads, because then that will build the confidence, that will build the visibility, that will help people to say, oh, wait, hold on, I'm seeing these buses, these vehicles all over the place. Maybe electric vehicles are not as bad as I originally thought, and then supporting the building that interest in society. So I'm not sure if that answered your question effectively in terms of the off-grid systems. Well, let me know and I can go again.
Are you good?
Yeah. Basically, you've answered a portion of the question. My question was basically regarding making it part of the current pilot project, because if you have something that is visible, that basically stands out, like a DC fast charging location that has solar canopy with a battery energy storage system and has a reduced cost, I believe that this would be go a far way of basically giving a visual representation of the viability of electric vehicles.
Yeah, that's something that we actually are exploring. So in the Jamaica pilot specifically, with the charging infrastructure that will have to come with the buses themselves, we're having discussions because, as you would be able to appreciate, the times at which the buses are operating might be during the day, which is when we have the most amount of solar PV. And rather than wasting that time, wasting that energy, we're having discussions about having these chargers publicly accessible. I can't confirm and say for sure this is the case because it is a conversation that we do have to have with the utility as well. So it's something that we're considering, but we're taking your point for sure. Because I do agree that if it's a thing where we're setting up these charging stations that's accessible to the public at a lower rate, I think that'll be good. But then also we have to keep in mind the regulations that are in place with respect to the utilities and selling of power. That's not something that you can do without approval. So yeah. A question?
Okay. I'll only go to one. Right. They should hear me from here. So considering considering you're with CCREEE, it's my baseline assumption that there are CARICOM level discussions with regards to that preference to standards. And if so, could you maybe note what standard is preferred, and is it similar to the one in Barbados? Because I think there could be lessons to learn from scaling from that perspective.
All right. So precisely. So a part of the creation, I was mentioning it a little bit earlier, but we have a consultant that is working on this project, essentially looking at assessing all the different standards, assessing what has worked, not only in the region but across the world, and looking at it and transferring it into the Caribbean context, because we are different, we're unique, but there are similarities that exist across the world in terms of those type of standards. So it's not something that has been finished as yet. The work is started, the data collection, but it will be interesting to see at the back end, because it's something that we're going to be recommending to CARICOM, and hopefully we can take it forward. We can't guarantee and say, oh, yes, for sure, this will be the standard, but it is a very long research paper that is going to look at what is most applicable for the region. So yes, looking at Barbados, the standards that they're using, we're speaking about CCS2 versus using the standards in America and China. It's a part of the ongoing discussion, but we have to be able to justify why we're selecting whichever preference, whichever connectors.
All right. Before we take any more questions, no, please come. I just want to highlight to everybody online, especially to look below in the chat. There's a sign-up sheet that was sent by Prof. Stevenson. I'm going to copy it and have you guys and send it again. before you sign off on this forum, I'll just beg you guys to please complete the form before you leave. Those in person, the form is right on the desk there with the big pink. Yeah, thank you, Chantal. So please sign it up before you leave. Thank you. We're taking another question from Mr. Angel.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to note here that Flash Motors had assisted the campus by donating a charging station by the Assembly Hall, which we have, somewhat used, but it hasn't been operationalized yet. So we are now in the process of, getting that charging station operationalized, get the access to the proper software. And I'm just wondering, is there still an opportunity for the university to better align with what CCREEE is doing? Is it too late for the university? And further, from Xavier's side, how, going forward, can we better, work together to ensure that this program is actually successful?
All right, so I'll take the last part of the question first. Xavier had to leave, but I know UA is close to his heart, as he said. So I could definitely put you in touch with the Flash Motors team. And one of their salespersons is actually downstairs. So for those who are in the room, you'll actually get to see one of the vehicles that Flash Motors carries. But you can definitely will put you in touch in terms of operationalizing the charger that is here. And with regards to the university benefiting directly from this project, we can talk about what that could look like. We know that there are limitations in terms of being able to provide buses, but there are definitely synergies and opportunities that we can explore to be able to support the university. Beyond just the lessons at the end of it, we can definitely have that conversation in terms of what opportunities could arise even before that, while we're going through the design process with the other universities, so that, you can learn along with us and move forward. All right, so clearly something interesting happened.
I have some questions online. We're running against time, so I'll probably just take two. Mr. Corey Roland.
Yes.
Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm chiming in from the United States. Heavy interest in the Caribbean island. I'm a dual citizen from the United States and Barbados, so I understand what direction you guys are going in. My question is to Buckle. Thank you for answering the question from last week about the universal charging connectors. That's a big solution that's happening in the States. I feel like y'all guys will benefit from that. But I have a grassroots construction question. Is there in the framework any additional training for the trades in understanding how to install EV chargers? And that should be directed from the vendors. Have y'all addressed that? Because I understand that some contractors are coming from other islands to install EV chargers. And some of the trades that's on the island, they don't understand how to tie the powers in together. That's one question. And my last question is, are y'all installing to any IBC codes, because you're dealing with climate change? And salt water and EV charging electricity they don't mix. So is there a future outlook towards that direction?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first question first. As it relates to the procurement process, something that is written inside the contracts themselves is that when the installer is coming in, they have, because remember, a core part of the NDC-TEC project is to build institutional capacity across the region. So a part of the contract would have been signed through the procurement process, it would include training. You would have to train the trainers, train the vehicle operators, train the fleet managers to understand how to use the vehicles. And to be very frank, they're incentivized to do so because they want their products to be utilized and such as it's successful. So a part of the contract, it is written, but the manufacturers themselves will also have their own incentive to want to train people how to use and operate the different charging infrastructure and electric vehicles. As it relates to the standards and making the considerations for protection from sea spray and so on, I think that's something that's absolutely brilliant. It has to be included. As it relates to how, It depends on the locations for the charging infrastructure, because not all locations are going to be near the sea, especially within Jamaica, where a lot of the charging infrastructure will be placed further inland. But for sure, these type of considerations, because safety is a must. I think Zibi would have touched on it earlier in terms of even looking at the connectors and the adapters. That's a definite issue as it relates to safety, because we're talking about extremely high voltage, very high currents as well, which is dangerous. It's more parts, more moving parts, more parts that can break. So
100%.
these things are implemented safely is going to be absolutely crucial.
Yeah, 100%. Because here in the States, you have people, remember, you're dealing with the public. So when they charge their cars, sometimes they don't plug them up properly. They just be laying on the ground. Then when it's raining, you just never know what happens. But then it goes into the install process as well, and setbacks, where you can install them, the location next to the sea. You know, you're dealing with those type of elements.
Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, man. No problem at all.
Yes, sir.
And then, yes.
So Donahue, do you still have a question or no? Oh, maybe you got it.
Yeah, hi. I joined late. I just wanted to know if there are any chargers, you might have said it, chargers on campus for students or staff, if they want to charge, would they have access to it?
Well, I can attempt to answer. So we do have one charging station currently located by the Assembly Hall. There's another by the physics department, but that one is tied to a specific project. We are in the process of operationalizing the charging station by the Assembly Hall. There will be a structure for it. Only staff at this time will be allowed to access that charging station, but hopefully as we roll out other stations as the program expands, students will also be able to benefit.
Awesome sauce. So thank you so much. We're not welcome.
Procurement. You have many options in terms of manufacturers of EVs. When you procure those 15 vehicles or up to 22, I think you said, who are the partners you work with? Tesla, BYD, Volkswagen? Who you get it from?
Okay, so I don't have all the models here in terms of what was finally procured, but it is an international tender process that happened in Saint Lucia, and it will be an international tender process that happens in Jamaica as well. There are a few things to note about how we approach that process. One, we would have mentioned that we did meet with the local dealers. So we did that in Saint Lucia. We've done that here to signal to them that this is coming. And they would have their partners who bring in EVs so that they can signal to them that this is an opportunity that is coming, because a part of the procurement will require after-sales support in country, including parts and a workshop. And so that is a part of what we've done. So in Saint Lucia, they've gotten a wide range of models. I don't want to start calling because I might forget. I can share that with you afterwards. But it was a wide range of models that were procured for Saint Lucia, even though all of them are coming from one dealership. And it's a local dealership that had different partners depending on different types of vehicles, because it was bikes, small bus, big bus, truck, pickup trucks, right? So there were a mixture that would have been procured there. But the key thing is the local participation is crucial for the sustainability beyond the life of the pilot.
All right. So
They
sorry.
were BYD's BYDs and Geely vehicles.
Okay. All right, guys. Sorry to cut this event short. I am late for our meeting myself, but I'd like to thank again our presenters for attending. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you so much, onliners, for coming and for everybody's active participation. Persons here, you guys can actually go downstairs in the physics parking lot. The Flash Motors Super Van, I believe, is available for viewing. And then everybody can come back up here and meet for refreshments. So please go down. It will also give our physics team time to set up inside for refreshments. And networking opportunities. So if you have more questions to ask, feel free to do so. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.